All things brand strategy, marketing, and design. Real-world insights, industry tips, and strategies you can use. This is Branding for Success, the podcast.
And welcome to episode 12. I'm Rick.
I'm Connor.
And today we're going to be talking about branding beyond logos.
We sure are.
So let's talk about the misconception that branding is primarily focused on the visual identity of a logo. Why do you think people think that logos are their brand?
Oftentimes logos are sort of your first introduction to the brand. I think they usually, they tell you the name, they give you a sort of idea of the visual identity and maybe what they're about a little bit. And so I think people put a lot of stock into that, and I think they don't really realize that it needs to go further than just a logo.
When you say goes further than a logo, as in the name of our episode, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about strategy? Are we talking about brand strategy? Are we talking about positioning? Are we talking about color theory? What are we talking about?
I think it's all of that. I think it all goes into it, all plays into this. Things like color palettes or typography or like branded graphic elements that can be used, a lot of other ways to recognize and like boost sort of like a visual identity of your brand rather than just the logo.
So we have a lot of components then that make a brand, and it seems to me that if you want to have a brand that is effective, you really need to have a brand that achieves a few things. It sounds like you want a brand that is memorable, one that people can retain and recall.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want one that is impactful, as in it creates that space in the mind to be memorable, and it creates almost a narrative that goes with it, right? So there's kind of a story to it or a message to go along with it. It could be what they do. It could be a value proposition. It could be just a quirky feature or facet of the brand, whatever it is, it has to come across. And it also needs to be something that is able to be consistently repeated and used throughout that brand's presence, right? So it seems to me that those tools and aspects you just talked about are the things that allow us to do that.
Yeah.
So when somebody wants to have their brand designed and developed, they usually come in saying, oh, I want it to come across a certain way. I want it to be professional, but fun, but creative, but whatever, right? Yeah. How is it as brand strategists and designers that we are able to accommodate that?
Usually one of our first steps when working with a client is to identify their core values. And I think finding things like this, different sort of ideas for how they want their brand to be perceived and what's important to them as a brand, I think identifying that is a great place to start. I think a very good way to make sure that we're able to build a whole identity for them beyond just a logo is, we've talked about it many times before, but just starting with stylescapes, we can sort of build a whole visual identity where you can look at it and get a great feel for the brand. You see the colors, the typography, some images, some photos, some sort of
graphic treatments
before you even see the logo at all. And you can see this one look and get a great feel for the brand as a whole. And I think that you almost forget there's not even a logo there. I think starting and being able to plan these things effectively goes a long way.
So by having these stylescapes and these fancy mood boards, you evoke certain feelings.
Yeah.
Right, and with the viewer. And whoever's looking at this stylescape, it's our client in this case. They're able to go, ooh, that's the feeling I want to evoke. This one shows me that it is credible, it is professional, it has enough blues, it's got enough sharp angles, and this, that, and the other thing. And that lets us know, okay, they are creating this model of a successful brand in their mind based on those adjectives. It's something that is creative, professional, et cetera, and that these are the visual elements that are going to convey that for them, right? And our job is to be able to say, okay, great, is that narrative, is that story that this person has the same one we're trying to convey with the brand strategy itself, right? And that's all based on those core values we talked about. That's based on all the stuff in the beginning that we talked about.
Yeah. So we've mentioned a lot of different elements that are part of a brand outside of a logo. Do you have any real-world examples of a company that's done this effectively?
Sure. So if you think of Nike, and you take the Nike logo, which is the swoopy doop, and you also got the word mark for Nike. Sometimes they go together. But also Nike does this really interesting look and feel that is distinctively Nike from the 90s to the 2010s, that everyone probably can see it and go, oh, that's Nike. Usually it's this very dramatic photography, and let's say it's very dark, stark background. You got somebody on the front of it who's a super athlete. They may be recognizable to people who might pay attention to certain niche sports or the Olympics or something.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody who's like on the starting line and they've clearly been running or something, and they're about to run a race, and they're sweating and all that stuff, and they're looking determined into that camera. And the way that photography is so dramatic,
Yeah.
and they use maybe black and white, and it's very
a lot of black and
grainy and high contrast and stark. Nike does this to evoke something that is very powerful with the "Just Do It" slogan, right? It's about being able to, know that this is going to take effort, and you really got to dig in, and that is the Nike spirit.
But it instills that like confidence and tells you you will overcome this, you can do it.
Yes.
Buy Nike.
Buy Nike. Why not? Be Nike. It's more like be Nike.
It really is.
Right? Be Nike. Nike represents this.
It's more than just like, it's honestly, it's more than shoes, it's more than clothes even. I mean, they definitely have like sort of, a hand in all of these different baskets in this whole world. And I think they do that effectively by building up this whole brand like together rather than just like focusing on one particular direction.
Yeah. It's not one sport. It's not one item of
exactly.
clothing. It's not one, sporting good. It is an entire philosophy around being an athlete is what they do. They show the spirit of the athlete in their branding.
It does.
I think that's their narrative.
Yeah. It has a certain style of instilling confidence where you don't even have to be into sports. I know tons of people who love and represent Nike all the time who don't play anything, but it still comes with this sort of this attitude that it brings you, I feel like, by wearing and consuming their products.
Yeah, it's the athlete, as I call it, the athlete spirit, right?
Yeah.
I think
No,
Nike
it is.
tries to embody that. And I think when you look at the best brands, they embody some sort of either philosophy or lifestyle or some sort of narrative. And I think the logo is just one teeny tiny mark that represents all of that. And the way you make all of that is all the other stuff we've been talking about, from typography to color to photography style to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is another example that we could talk about in a different space?
What about Ben and Jerry's?
Ben and Jerry's. I do like ice cream.
Yeah, me too.
So, okay, let's talk about the logo first. Logo. So their logo is pretty playful, I think. Like the typography in it is very like bubbly and playful. It's just all that comes to mind.
It evokes
for me.
the sort of like fun and creativity and approachability.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very important thing to them, I think.
Yeah. And then when you go outside of the logo itself, their use of colors are usually pretty vibrant.
Yeah.
I think they use a lot of like natural looking stuff with like clouds and skies and stuff like that.
If you think about like the packaging for the ice cream, usually it is like a grassy field with the sky, and then it's like a big ice cream in the front and the ingredients and sometimes little characters or whatever they're doing depending.
Yeah. So downtown New Haven, we have a location. I've gone in there more than a few times.
Yeah.
And on their walls, they always have local community-based murals. Of course, fields of grass, cows that are very happy, very cartoony looking, very fun, very creative.
Gotta represent the happy cows.
Happy cows in that happy community.
Yeah.
And I think that's their story that they're doing, is they're really trying to be a part of their communities. They're trying to help their communities. And you were mentioning earlier that they do a lot of, like, they help charities or do like fundraising, right?
I think they do a lot to get involved with the communities. I've seen them, they've even done like custom ice cream flavors and things like that to draw awareness to certain causes. You can tell it's very important to them to feel like you're part of the Ben and Jerry's family, and like they're helping the community and they're giving back, and like it's a very give and take type thing. It's not just like, they're not some big corporate empire trying to make money off ice cream. You know, it feels like they're bringing ice cream to the people, and they want to spread happiness and joy and things like that to the community.
Yeah, and I think that's the vibe, is that they are the people, right? Is they are the people making the ice cream, and they're bringing people together.
And they can still do it in a way that sort of like evokes creativity and like fun and like experimenting and like trying new things and like getting out there and just like being a part of the world, you know?
Yeah.
Think about like the ridiculous, intense, just chaotic ice cream flavors that they come out with, and it works.
Potato chips in ice cream?
Exactly.
What?
You know, they make it work. They try things and they be creative and they step outside of the usual comfort zones, I think. But they'd never do it in a way that's meant to feel like edgy or like modern or futuristic or anything. It's always just sort of like playful and like kind of gives the feeling of like kids coloring outside of the lines. You know,
Yeah.
it's fun.
So between these two brand examples that we've talked about,
Yeah.
what we're really talking about then is way more than just a look and feel in their brand. We're talking about what these brands stand for, what they represent. And so to me, when we talk about branding beyond a logo, we're talking about what does this brand represent?
Yeah.
What do they embody? What do they personify? I think what we're really talking about is if you're looking into branding yourself or your own company or whatever, you really should be looking at what you're trying to express at this high level based on those core values and that value proposition of who you're trying to serve.
Yep.
Right? What is that narrative you're trying to put out there? And instead of having a logo being designed just to say that as literally as possible, like we cut hair or something like commodity like that, you really want to think about what is that inherent value, what is that deeper value that people can connect emotionally to. And if you can decide what that is, then you can employ all those tools we talked about, typography, color, shapes, graphic elements, imagery of certain styles and aesthetics, to create something like a stylescape, a mood board, to really evoke this essence, almost an artistic expression, right? And if that expression is then capturing that essence of what you're trying to evoke, then you're in the right path to then creating a logo for your brand that embodies that. So that's kind of the full picture here.
I think a lot of times, people take the logo and like you said, they need it to be as literal as possible when really there's so much more to it than that. And I think you can build this whole brand that tells you exactly what, this brand is all about and what they do. And then you have the logo to the sort of title together rather than like the logo being the important part and everything else just like an afterthought. Which I think, unfortunately, a lot of brands who don't rely on like people who are properly trained or like, a marketing team. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, companies will rely on that sort of mentality. But
so when you're dealing with branding, your logo really is just a mark to symbolize everything else that your brand is. It isn't something that has to communicate. It's something that needs to be memorable, make that impact of that narrative or embodiment that we talked about, and be repeatable in a consistent manner. Because when you do those things, then that narrative, that story, every time that logo mark is on something that does that, if you're Ben & Jerry's and your logo's on there and it's got this fun, wacky design on it, people could see the playfulness, they could see the fun. The logo itself doesn't have to be fun. It's memorable and it goes with all that stuff.
And on the flip side, you have the dramatic photography, the black and white, the hardworking athlete staring directly down the camera, paired with the Nike logo, you know exactly what you're looking at. And it's completely different, but both equally as effective.
And that's the power of branding.
That is the power of branding.
Look at that.
Look at that. So thanks for joining us on today's episode of
Branding for Success, the podcast,
where we talked about the power of branding beyond just logos.
Join us next time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Branding for Success, the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Follow us on social media for more tips and visit creative.com for further resources and insights. See you next time.